One, I'm going to preface this with, I wish I was a reservoir engineer so I could ask you smarter questions than I'm about to ask you. But, how do E&Ps as a whole really treat the longevity of their wellbores? Because, I remember back in the day, some companies, especially public companies, would just, open up the choke and get as much production, as much initial production as possible to make it look good for quarterly reports. Is there sentiment change to where companies are really looking at how do we maintain the, the lifespan of this well and get more out of it instead of just kind of going balls to the wall on production?
That is a good question. So it varies by operator. I guess I should say, if you're a small operator and you got bills to pay tomorrow, you're probably going to open up that well because you need to sell the oil.
That's every small operator. Right? We've been there. I felt that.
It's you can go in and you can say to them all you want. Hey, listen, you should do this to your well. You should flow back a little bit slower, and it just doesn't fit in with what they're trying to do. And a lot of those small operators, kind of up until recently, weren't worried about 5 years from now because their company wasn't going to exist. They just needed to get that thing up and going and then sell it. Now there's definitely some out there too that were small operators that were like, no, we need to be a bit more patient here. And some of them were too patient and they could open it up faster. So I think, years ago in 2014, we saw a lot more of operators. And before that, we saw a lot of operators that were opening them up really hard right off the bat. But it's scaled back since then. There's definitely a lot more people that are a lot more cognizant now of controlling their production and not opening up the well super aggressively. And, there's still some out there that do, and there's still some out there that don't. And thankfully our tool basically just addresses that completely. So, with our tool, it's going to tell you if you're slightly damaging it. So if you're the guy that needs to pay bills tomorrow, instead of just ripping it wide open, maybe you rip it wide open, but a little slower. So you can still pay your bills, but not sacrifice.
Yeah, I think go ahead.
So I think on the public company side, you're definitely seeing that shift, right, to look more at the EUR.
Yeah,
sure, they were rewarded maybe more in the past on the MPD side, but it's back to the the two words you hear just all the time, right? It's cash flow and long-term sort of sustainability of this industry and these companies. And if you're not looking at EUR, like you're definitely not going to be rewarded by Wall Street as much anymore. So there's that. And then I think there's some education going on in the industry too. I mean, I believe maybe one of the first papers on this subject of kind of the engineered flowback is probably 10 years ago, but it's just now, I feel like catching on in terms of people understand it's not just the slow back. It could be flowing back even faster, but now it's like flipping the headlights on your car. You can drive faster. Now you have visibility into what's going on real time. Maybe you can open it up even faster and not damage, the ultimate EUR.
Yeah.
So now that people are getting educated on that and believe in that approach, I think that's another thing that's helping to drive uptake of a concept like this.
Yeah, if I was one of these big public companies, I'd think that I'd want to focus on EUR and really just maintaining the lifespan of those assets. That way you can weather the storms, the ups and downs of the cycles. But then again, that's not how Wall Street operates, right? And public investors want to see.
I think it's changing a little bit.
Yeah. So, we'll see what happens there. And then back to your point, some of these E&Ps, they don't think that their company would be around in 5 years. It might have been a 3 or 5 year flip model, and that path to liquidity's disappeared, right? And so now they're like, holy shit, we got to actually operate these assets for the better part. I know some management teams that are, 8 years in and that flip never came. So you have to really start looking at how can we operate these assets more efficiently and really get, like I like this idea. Like I like it because a lot of the technologies that we have come on, like right now, I think a big trend is optimizing the back office and personnel and getting more with less, but actually getting insight into how you operate the assets is a huge problem, right? And I think that you just look at the way that we've done it with dummy iron, and you're getting your flow back, and it's like, man, there's got to be a better way to get some insight.
You're spot on. And I think the further with our space, it's kind of lost between completions and production. There's not a lot of skill set really focused on this middle ground area, the first 30 days basically of production. And yet there's all this data. And like one of the sayings that the founders used with this business all along was, your completion can only get worse, right? Like the day you finish completing that well, right? It's the best it's ever going to be.
It's done.
You open up that well and you turn it over to a bunch of yahoos, you're just damaging this $8 million job you just finished. That's really short-sighted, right? So why not spend a little bit to get that right? And,
that's why drilling and completions can, if the well doesn't perform well, they'll just blame it on production, right? And then if it doesn't go well, production will be like drilling and completions just fucked it up when they drilled it. Yeah, just pass the blame around.
Another thing they did is they would blame the frac provider.
Yeah, absolutely.
Point at whatever service provider was out there and say, "Oh, our well's not performing that well. It must have been something that happened during the frac job when this happened," and turned out it was actually something that happened during the 10 days they were flowing that well back.
Yeah, I think, when you look at how does that work though? Like when you guys are providing that insight, how does it affect E&Ps when they move forward? Like can they take insight? You guys know this better than anyone that each well varies, even on a lease, right? Much less if it's several miles away.
I'm going to plug our Urtec paper now.
There you go, man. I set you up for the alley-oop, man. Go for it.
With a dunk on your face.
We covered this in an Urtec paper that was just presented. And basically what we were trying to show is how surface data acquisition methods are affecting well performance diagnostics. So everything Alex told you about the equipment and everything, a big piece of what that does, it gives you really crisp, clean data. And when you have really crisp, clean data, it's like looking at a clear picture. If I give you a blurry picture and then I give you a marker and I say, okay, draw what you think is in the picture here, that's typically what's been going on. And the way operators optimize completions typically is iterative completion optimization. So they'll change a small thing on this well, another small thing on that well over there, another small thing on this one, and they're looking for the best one, right? The problem is you got to wait 180 days, maybe a year to kind of really assess that well. Well, by the time you've waited that long, you've already changed 10 other things and moved on. You need to know within the first couple weeks if that change in the completion design is going to be beneficial so you can implement it on subsequent completion designs. So that's what also this does. But up until recently when we had our equipment, this can be really, really challenging because it's like that picture, right? You get a blurry picture and let's say in one picture you're holding up a can of Coke, in another picture you're handing up a can of 7-Up, right? And I say, well, now take your marker and draw what's in this picture. Well, you don't know if that's Coke or 7-Up. But if you have a really clean picture, then you're like, oh, there it is. I can see the difference. So that's what really clean data does for you, is you're able to distinguish what impact that change in completion design had on your well in a very, very short period of time. So it's not only the drawdown optimization that we focus on and bringing the well online, but it's the completion evaluation that we do after that that helps you zero in on what changes in your completion design are having the biggest impact on that well performance.
Yeah, you guys can really shorten the learning curve, right?
Yes.
And get results quicker.
Yes.
And I'll say that, as much as we're invested in the hardware space, right, and we believe in the value add of the type of equipment we have, we think in the long run, the rest of the industry will get there as well on the hardware side. But, we're not going to go out and compete with Covenant or Select, who have hundreds of these spreads. We've got like 10-ish.
Yeah.
But that's not the scalable part of the business. It's all the know-how that, Daryl and his engineers have built into analyzing what comes out of those spreads.
Yeah.
That's where we're heavily invested going forward. And we're busy. Our spreads are an important part of the operation. But really what we're trying to do is prove out that the whole rest of the industry should get to that spec, also safer and cleaner, not just good data, so that, to your point, we can do something with that data and ultimately help them optimize that asset they've spent so much money.
Yeah, I imagine if you guys get E&Ps sold on it, right, they can start demanding that other, hardware providers start coming up to that spec, and then you guys can focus on the scalable part of your business.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.